Hello?
Can you hear us now?
Yeah. Yeah, angle it down too.
There we go.
Hi guys, can you hear us?
They're saying they can't hear.
We can't hear you either.
Wait, will you turn let's turn this on.
Oh yeah. Anything better now?
I did everything exactly the same.
Hello?
Hey, can you hear us at all?
Now we can hear
We can
you.
hear you now, yeah.
Might be too loud on the TV. I can hear you too. I can
Do we hear the options?
Can you hear us?
Yes, we can. Okay, so we spent some time, and sorry for the late call-in. We spent some time and grouped ourselves, and we had two kind of main overarching themes from both from this current reading as well as previous discussions. And so we had one group that gathered around building classroom community and using that classroom community to authentically integrate and use classroom diversity to enrich our teaching. So it was both about community and diversity, very broad. And then the other group looked at really tangible vocabulary tools and instructional tools and had some specific questions about what they're currently integrating, and then some questions around how some new ideas that they want to incorporate, but we're not really sure how to move forward in that.
Wonderful.
So, who wants to start? Okay, we'll start with our classroom community takeaway. Anyone want to sum up what we talked about, or?
You were doing summaries before.
I can't remember what I said.
So we talked a lot about classroom community and creating authentic ways for students to share their diversity while still keeping it student-centered and not necessarily teacher-driven. And one of the things that a lot of us thought about, when we're thinking about incorporating more diversity, we often, our first thought is, okay, let's bring in some more diverse books and have some more multicultural books, but how do we take it past that? And really focus on that student-centered piece as well. Do you guys have anything to add from that summary? No. I guess that's where we got to, like, as a small group, and we kind of all came up with that question, and we wanted to hear your feedback, and then maybe that'll spark some of us in a back and forth. Does that sound okay?
I think that sounds great. That idea of books, multicultural books, is really, really smart. So yeah, that's a wonderful idea for a good starting spot. You know the article by, did anybody, I know we had a lot of choices for articles. Did anybody happen to read the Maniac 2008 article? By any chance?
Wait, can you repeat that? Sorry, we're messing with the volume a little bit.
Okay. So my first comment was the multicultural books is a brilliant idea. That's really, really smart. So that's a really great way to start. My next question was, I know we had a lot of choices for articles this time. There were 5 different articles. I was wondering if anybody chose the Maniac 2008 article.
I didn't read it.
And the reason I mentioned that is because the question that you posed is, that I wrote down, is what are some ways to kind of highlight diversity in our classroom community in authentic ways. And in that Maniac article, he talked about 2 classroom teachers who did a really nice job of doing this daily news activity. And did anybody happen to look at that one? I couldn't tell.
I feel like I thought the author was what you were talking about, but that's not ringing a bell to me. So.
We did.
Okay, I think I read one of them by that author, not the other.
Okay, so there was a short one, I think it was a 2007, and then there was this longer 2008 article that says, "What's your news?" I wonder if that might be a useful article to think about for that important question you asked about how do we go beyond multicultural books? What are some ways we can interact? What was really powerful for me about this article is that the news stories actually come from the kids themselves. So Maniac talks about how, I mean, this is a really great way to bridge home and school because the ideas for the news come from the kids themselves. And the teachers started out by first modeling and doing kind of like shared writing and modeled writing in terms of, getting the news, getting the kids to talk about the news from home. And it was a fairly short activity, usually about 15 or 20 minutes. And then I think it was the second semester or the second 9 weeks, maybe it was, after the teachers spent a lot of time modeling how to do this and co-constructing the news stories from home and editing and revising, then the kids started taking the lead. So the teacher kind of used that gradual release of responsibility model to kind of hand it over to the kids. So it strikes me that that might be a really powerful way to think about that second issue that you all are talking about. And I hear Dana saying, and nodding, so maybe he has extra comments or additional comments.
No, before you brought that up, my comment was going to be like a weekend news or a daily news thing similar to what Patrick had described in that article.
Yeah, and what I like about the article is that he actually, he talked about work that he did in 2 elementary classrooms, and he actually provides concrete examples of what the teachers did and how they did it that you might find useful to actually model on your own instruction.
Since nobody actually read that article this round, do you feel like that the models that they suggest in there is applicable to like our preschool all the way through our adults, or is it really geared at, do you think it's best for elementary or middle school students?
Well, the classrooms that he talked about in the article were, I believe it was K1 and 2. To be honest, I've used modifications of this approach at the upper elementary level. No.
Yeah. I haven't used it beyond in elementary level, so I would think that it could be applicable to like a secondary type level, but I don't have experience doing that, so I don't know for sure. But certainly all the way down to the kindergarten level, and you could likely do it as a shared writing in some way, or at the preschool level, maybe they're not writing their news, but preschool can certainly have, like story time, which is basically them telling stories that they're bringing in about something that from the weekend or something like that. And it's just not written, it's oral. And it would be an important thing, especially to develop oral language capabilities as well, just to give them time to use language in a purposeful way like that.
Have you guys ever done anything? You guys do that?
Share stories?
Yeah.
Not yet. Looking to share. We use share and tell. They bring their toys and they talk about that a lot. We have the retail board now, so they're retelling the story.
Yes, in our preschool, we do a couple things. We have not done them this year yet. We have done like some sort of like share and tell where they bring a toy and they get to share in a circle about. And that one is a very authentic way to make it happen because it's meaningful to them. We just implemented the retail board for them. It's a fill board that they can use with some images to retell fairy tales. And then I guess that also happened in authentic ways when they're reading through pictures. Okay.
Yeah, formally sometimes if it's like a Monday morning when we're having morning meeting, we'll ask like, did anyone do something fun of the weekend? Just sort of like getting them a little bit of storytelling practice. I know it's pretty short, like often we'll go off topic, but it's like getting.
Yeah, the story, when they're telling their stories for like story time, they don't need to be long stories, obviously. Well, some kids can talk forever, as I'm sure you know. But you also can get a sense of when, if you were actually to sit down and analyze their stories, you see different structures to how those stories are being told, and sometimes those structures relate to what different cultures bring into the idea of storytelling.
I guess I did not mention that they also do that a lot in writing. We're moving a lot more this year in the direction of having them write about anything they want, and then we ask them to read their story to us or share their story, and we make sure that one of us is sitting at a table, and there's a lot of conversations happening while they're writing their stories, and they talk a lot and they exchange a lot, and I think that it's a very meaningful way in how that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it sounds like what you're doing is what's talked about, what's discussed across all of these articles, which is engage in meaningful conversation. Yeah, that language development. Another thing that it strikes me is, there's the article by More and More. As you're engaging in some of the oral language development, what was nice about that article is they gave a lot of specific examples of different kinds of prompts that we as teachers can use to try to help the kids extend their language in lots of different ways. I don't know if anyone chose that one either, but it's a quick, for example, if you look at page 444, each of the pages has tables with different ways of working with English learners to help them kind of elaborate on their oral language. So that's another thing to think about as a possibility.
Three of us did read that article, yeah, we all agree that we found it really useful it was very tangible. It was very clear on like what to say when somebody has a correct response or a partially correct response, or somebody might be off topic. And we also had a question about that.
It was a question about, it gives an example on page 443 on that article. It says that they promoted by Echevarria and Graves the use of direct rather than indirect questions to promote clarity. And that there's a place to use direct questions of students and that facilitate the elaboration of the responses. The first paragraph on the left column. And my question was, is the examples they gave on the back the direct or indirect questions, or is there a way to know an example of what a direct versus an indirect question would be?
So can I just ask for a bit of clarification on your question? So you're talking about the left-hand column on page 443.
Yeah.
Of the partial first paragraph.
Yep, the first paragraph. It segues into when they're talking about a distinction of Kasten. It kind of segues into the previous page, last paragraph.
So then referring to questions.
What? It just talks about it.
So we're looking up. We found what the area you're talking about. Could you say again, now that we found it, kind of what was the question you posed?
So my question is, they're talking about direct versus indirect questions and how that can facilitate responses or develop academic language and motivate the students. So my question is, I'm trying to figure out what direct versus indirect means. So I don't know if an example could be provided to kind of understand more what they meant by versus a direct, indirect question that a teacher could give a student when they do certain things. Like the examples are provided at the end of the article. But
is that something that maybe Bloom's taxonomy could help? You know how Bloom's taxonomy, or like I've seen them online a lot on like how to prompt for answers or different kinds of evaluations that you can use according to the different levels. They also have some up with questions. Is that something that could help in like asking direct and indirect questions?
Do you want to start? Or do you want to? Okay. Well, I actually like that idea because, I mean, I'm not 100% sure of what they're talking about when they're talking about the difference between direct and indirect. Other than they might be talking about literal questions compared to inferential questions. So, is that how you interpret that? So the less, like the lower questions on Bloom's taxonomy would be the more literal ones. You know, what color was the girl's coat? The girl's coat was red, and it says that in the text. A more inferential question might be, the kids put on snow, or they put on galoshes, or they put on rubber boots before they went outside. So an inference might be, oh, well, maybe it's raining out there. So is that the kind of thing you're asking? The difference between the different levels of questions, higher and lower order?
I think in this case, the direct questions are directly related to the response that the student gave. So if you look at like the table 1 and 2 on page 44, those questions like, oh, can you tell me more about that? It's directly in response to what the student had just said, because the teacher is by providing that question that directly responds to the student's response, you're bringing more clarity into the conversation and expanding upon those ideas. So it's my understanding that that's what they mean by using those direct questions, because as it says, it then facilitates elaboration of their responses. Oh, can you tell me more about that? Where did you find that answer? Questions that are going to get them to elaborate upon their thinking, or to get others to elaborate upon someone's thinking.
Yeah, Kristen just commented that chart is a great tool for tutors to have as well, and a way to guide them, especially in offering open-ended questions, which I think is
a challenge area sometimes.
Yeah, it's not as, it's not very, I guess, not very natural to some of us, and so especially to volunteer tutors, it's usually like a yes or no, which one's right. So to get them more in that thinking of broader open-ended questions that might not have a right answer.
Yeah, so your questioning can be both open-ended, meaning there's more than one possible right answer, or it could be a closed question, like what color was Red Riding Hood's shoes? But then you could follow that up with a direct question that prompts elaboration. How do you know that? Mm-hmm. Which gets them to extend the conversation, even if it is like a yes or no, there's one right answer to the question. It doesn't have to end there with an evaluation that says, good job, let's move on to the next question. There's ways that you can prompt elaborated discussion. And it talks here about how you can develop academic language, because when you recast the response that they give, you can recast it back to them using some more academic language in your recasted question, which helps to model that academic language for them. We're getting a note saying our internet connection is unstable, so hopefully we don't lose you.
You sound good.
Did the answer come through?
Yeah.
As I was talking, something came up on the screen that said your connection is unstable.
No, you're good. I love that idea of recasting the question and kind of keeping it going. I feel like the kids are so good at that. They're always, well, why? But then why this? And so kind of.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same tool that you use with your young, your infants and your 2-year-olds, or not your infants, but your 2-year-olds when they're first starting to learn how to talk, and they may say the wrong word or they may use the wrong syntax. You don't say, oh, no, you're not right. You're supposed to say it this way. You just recast it back to them using the appropriate syntax. And over time, they get socialized into those language practices.
I have a question regarding that. And I don't want to take us from the theme right now. We are trying to teach our preschoolers to ask questions, and I'm running out of good ideas. Maybe the one idea we've had or the modeling that we do, or maybe it's just like this article mentions, you need to give time and then the concepts need to transfer, and that's just what happens when you're acquiring a new language. So we have a surprise box, and we put something in there that is meaningful to them. It's like a superhero or a cartoon character that they know, and we often use each other for modeling of like how to ask a question. But I feel like sometimes I feel like we're just saying sentences like this. Our kiddos are saying, "It's an animal." Is something else where asked to like, is it an animal? And I just don't know how to make that happen. Like, when do they start asking questions? I mean, they do ask questions, but they do it in Spanish, and I feel like there's they're not connecting it. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, my first question was, are they asking questions right now? Because probably if you listen to them when they're playing, they're probably asking questions of each other all the time. And I mean, I have a 4-year-old at home, and I probably get asked 300 questions a day.
Yes.
So, kids are constantly asking questions. So the question that I would have is, what kind of questions are you hoping that they're going to ask? Because they're probably already asking questions. Are you looking for different kinds of questions? Are you looking for more academic?
I'm looking for WH questions, yeah.
And like, when are you looking for these questions, and what's the purpose of these questions?
To encourage language and more vocabulary.
And like during, because I feel like a lot of times we'll see questions when we're doing like a read aloud or something, and we won't get questions from them, we get comments. So is that, like, when are you guys doing this?
A morning meeting, something inside a surprise box, and we're just trying to ask them to guess what it is, by asking little questions of like, what do you think it is? And they're like, and then Kate and I model each other, and we're like, could it be an animal? And they're like, does it have a tail? Does it have, is it a dog? Things like that. Those are the questions that I'm going for. But maybe it's just part of time. I don't know.
Well, it could be. One way to go back to the original part of this conversation with the building classroom community, we talked about the idea of bringing in like a story time. If they're, and you say that they're telling stories when they're sitting in their small groups around writing time, and it's kind of like the informal conversation that's happening. If you had a more formalized story time where it was a student's turn to tell a story about their weekend or something that happened, that could be a place where the people who are listening then have a time to ask questions. And you could be modeling that and providing some different kinds of stems. Like the question could be about like, what was your favorite part, or why did you go there? Or, you can be modeling those kinds of questions. But then that would be an authentic, as Laura said, what's the purpose behind it? There's a purposeful task, a reason to ask questions, because the audience is looking for more information from the storyteller.
And I would add on that when we play like 20 questions with our tutoring students or our older students, that they have a lot of trouble with yes/no questions. And we have to prompt them a lot to get them to like come up with those. Well, is it brown? Is it, and they ask like much broader questions. They ask, and to get them to play that game specifically, like in a club, you have to like teach even like the third grader, like, no, we're doing yes/no questions only. And we're still teaching that skill of them trying to figure out, it's not an object, but like the object in the other person's head. So I think that, it's a skill that we're still working on with older students.
Well, and it makes me think of when I was teaching in a classroom, and like at the middle school level, I remember in 6th and 7th grade social studies, we were teaching 6th and 7th graders how to ask good questions, and in our frame, good questions was aimed at some of the research that we were trying to teach them to do. So I feel like it's this evolving skill, how to ask questions at different levels as we go. So to build on what Kristen was saying that, and Theo was saying that, what we know.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, for older students beyond preschool, like for your kids that are in, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, you can, there's resources on question answer relationships. And that's Taffy, that's,
QA, the question answer relationships.
Is it?
Oh, you talking about QARs?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. QA, that would be Raphael. Yeah, QARs.
Yeah,
Yeah, I thought you were talking about question.
I mean, that would be for older students. They talk about how you can teach students to categorize questions, whether they're answers that are, right there, you can find the answer in the book, or whether it has to be an inferential question, as a way to think about questioning related to text reading.
And that gets at what we were talking about earlier, like the literal inferential type questions, the different kind of questions. But I think one thing that I think at least 2 or 3 of you have mentioned that's really, really important, and that is, what's the purpose of the questions? I mean, what functions do they serve? It's not just teaching questions for the sake of teaching questions, but it's questions for the sake of some purpose that matters in terms of what you're trying to do. So I think you're really on target with that focus on meaning that you're talking about.
Yeah, so for example, maybe you're going to have, some sort of, I don't know, dinosaur unit or something coming up, and then you have some sort of objects that you're bringing in, and as the kids are exploring them, they're starting to generate questions, and those questions can then be explored further through the read alouds and things that you're doing in your discussion, but they're kind of setting questions that they want to learn more about, and then they're going to learn more about them.
Project-based learning.
Yeah, project-based learning.
What did we couldn't hear that. What was that?
Oh, we were cheering on project-based learning.
Oh, yeah, inquiry learning, project-based learning. Yeah, smart, very smart.
I mean, we know that that's going to be more engaging than not doing it. So, and you guys have the luxury of being able to do a lot of project-based learning because you're not being told, here's your curriculum, teach these lessons. So it's perfect.
So in classroom community, I was reading the Williams article, and a couple of times they mentioned recording your classroom and taping the work and taping yourself talking. And I was wondering, it's something that we talk about a lot doing. And I was wondering if you guys had any best practices or some good tips to kind of jumpstart that and start doing that here. Because I do want to record what I'm doing. And do you have any tips on that past? Because the article just is record your classroom.
Do you want to record for the purpose of you reflecting on your own teaching?
Yeah.
Or students to reflect on what they're doing?
I think a little bit of both. The initial thought I wrote down was, it also asks, do you want to be a student in your own classroom when you're reflecting on the language that you're using? And so my initial thought was I want to record what I'm saying and how I'm saying it and be really reflective. And do I like the way I'm talking to my students when I hear it back? Although I hate listening to myself teaching, but it would be a good exercise for me. But also in the fact of, when we're doing a reflection activity, sometimes I can get lost in the reflection activity, and being able to go back and hear what the kids were really saying and then being able to drive further the next lesson. So I guess 2 parts.
I think that's really, really impressive and really commendable. I mean, I guess one piece of advice I would have is that that can get okay. I think it's a really smart thing to do to record. It can also get overwhelming because you can have tons and tons and tons of recordings. So one of the things you might do is pick just pick pieces of things to record, and ask yourself, is there something I really want to work on right now that really matters to me, and record a small piece of that involves both maybe your talk and their talk. And then it's something you're thinking, okay, I'm not going to have to listen to 10 hours of myself because that's overwhelming, but I'm going to listen to a short piece of something that I think is really important for me right now that I want to try to work on. And so that's one thing you might think about. Another thing that can be fun with respect to the kids is recording little snippets of what they do across time so that they can see the evolution of the development of their own talk across time. So, almost like, how we have writing portfolios, you can do speaking portfolios for kids. to get a sense of, and it can be really powerful for them to go, and again, I keep that under control because you can get a lot, but it can be powerful to have small snippets across time for them to get to go back and listen to as they're maybe acquiring a new language or second language or learning more complex disciplinary vocabulary or whatever it is you happen to work on. It's nodding, so he may have additional comments there.
Part of it's just agreeing to when you're listening to yourself, have a focus. Like I'm going to record this, 5 minutes of my lesson because I want to listen back to the kinds of questions that I ask, and whether my questions are eliciting student talk or closing down student talk. Maybe that's all you're listening for, and there may be other things that you could listen to that for, but you're going to listen to it for a specific purpose.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can get lost in so many things to notice. And sometimes when there's too many things to notice, you don't notice anything at all because it's too much.
Yeah.
So think about what's your purpose for listening to the video or to the audio to reflect back on it. I mean, how you do it can be as simple as putting your smartphone in your pocket and putting on the voice memo feature, and then just carrying it around with you, for a few minutes. But I wouldn't let it get too long, because then the more burdensome it becomes, the less likely you are to use it.
And then the less useful it is to you. And I'm going to second what Dana said, and that is to trust your intuition in terms of what it is you're trying to do and what matters to you in your instruction right now.
Yeah, so I mean, if you guys are trying to build a lot of oral language capability among your English language learners, it might make sense to look at what kinds of prompts or questions am I using that solicit talk from the students? Because one of your goals is to get them talking, not for you to talk the whole time.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you. That makes it feels like an elephant when I think about recording, and that gives me a much more manageable piece. I'm like, oh, I can record 5 minutes of myself talking and make time to listen to that.
Right. And then as students get older, and if they're talking about an object or they're talking about a book or something like that, you can video record it and have them watch it and be looking for particular things. Is one person doing all the talking and the other people are quiet? They're watching to give feedback on that. Are we inviting other people into the conversation? Are we using evidence from the book if it's a book conversation? They can reflect on those kinds of things to look at their own language use.
I love that. I'll piggyback on something that you said, Cynthia. Jade came into the beginning of my club, and she was making some videos of my students right at the beginning, and we let them come up to perform. And then I have video of them doing a magic performance. And the difference, the kids were like laughing and they couldn't get up, and it took like 5 minutes to coax them out. And then in the last recording that I have, and the recording we're making right now, they're so engaged and they're so excited. And I put them together side by side with the different kids, and we're showing it as part of our parent participation week today. And I'm excited to see what the kids' responses are, because when I looked at it, I was just blown away by how they went from not being able to talk in front of an audience to like making jokes and having so much hand movement that we probably got to bring the hand movement back down again. But it was cool. So it would be fun to do that with their speaking too in group. So Jade, thank you for documenting the beginning of my club, because I would not have had that without you.
And using those little snippets, and again, just short ones as teaching tools, can be super powerful to say, to the kids, here's what I saw at the beginning, here's what I'm seeing now. Look at the difference, and then you explicitly identify what the differences are, and what you were aiming for, and so forth. And the kids like watching themselves, so that can be a powerful scaffolding tool for you. And if you have permission to use that, sometimes when you're trying to do work with the new group, to say, here's how this, the other group started, here's where they got, this is where we want you to get. Sometimes kids can get there faster if they know what it is they're aiming for. And that's true with the visual as well as the auditory.
Should I do this one? Okay, so I came up with some questions that I was kind of on my own with. So one
I read the shorter Maniac article, but one question that came up for me was there was a suggestion of bilingual literacy instruction, and they said particularly outside of school if that's not part of their school day, so the kids who aren't enrolled in dual programming. And so I had a thought if that could eventually be a possibility for our students and kind of what that would look like. And then the other piece was the need for explicit phonics instruction and high quality vocabulary instruction. And I had two questions with regards to that. One, thinking about if we should utilize a specific targeted strategy or if we should consider the mixture that we use. How vocabulary words should be chosen for students. I have certain English language learners who their vocabulary knowledge is just very like random. And so sometimes I do a lot of like authentic pieces where, you know, pulling from the book they're reading or the topic they're interested in. But sometimes I wonder how to fill in those gaps for just kind of basic words that will just be missing even if they have some of those words. I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like if they were in like an actual English class, they'd like have a unit on words for going to the beach, you know, but we don't really do that when it's just the second language they're learning, but sometimes they'll be missing these words that I'm not really sure how to authentically teach.
Could we maybe start with your first comment about the shorter Maniac article? It sounds like you were talking about the additive literacy instruction. Is that what you meant? The importance of both languages? Is that?
Yeah, so the part of it was commenting on how there should be a focus on improving their literacy skills in both languages. And I know a lot of our kids cannot read in Spanish, even if they're able to speak it, or they have low proficiency in any sort of academic Spanish. And I think it's a larger conversation, but it just made me wonder if there's small ways to do that, or if it would need to be like its own, you know, like a club run in Spanish, or if it just needs to be integrated. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Just real quickly, I think you're right about that notion of integrating, because I think across pretty much all the articles that we read for today, and certainly in the one you're talking about, you know, Maniac talked about you can do work in both English and Spanish, and that's really positive because what the kids know in one language transfers to the other and vice versa. So that's really smart, and it's a great way to build on, if they speak Spanish as a first language, to build on Spanish and the learning of English. I think you're right on target with that notion of integration, even in small parts of lessons and so forth. So I think you're on target with that.
But I would jump in and say, right now, I don't feel like we have the resources to do that. Staff-wise, I mean, I speak some Spanish and I wouldn't feel comfortable integrating that into my club. I think Jade's bringing up a bigger question of, is that a direction we need to try to move strategically as TLC? And I mean, that would go into a whole conversation with the board and obviously that, but is that, should we try to get there, or is that, in my mind, that's the conversation we've been trying to have with parents and really try to leverage their strength and their native language at home to integrate that component?
I mean, that's a good point. This is a big question. If I mean, one of the things that Maniac talked about in the other article, the 2008 article, is that the two teachers that he featured in that article are bilingual and they're very comfortable doing both languages. So that's yeah, you're right. That's an important issue to think about. To the extent people are comfortable with both languages and can pull in bits of the target language, if you're an English speaker and you can bring in bits of Spanish, it seems like it makes a lot of sense. Also the links to home, but you're right, that's a big question to think about where you're going.
Earlier we were also having a discussion, like if we were to do that, there will be some kids in our club who are native English speakers and who might not be in dual, and thus then they're completely not involved in that. So it would almost require us to break into small groups and maybe have the same text in 2 different languages.
Unless, and again, this depends on your context, and there are a lot of important issues to think about, unless you're like some parents whose kids speak English who've said, I would like my child who only speaks English to learn how to speak another language, and I'd like my child to start early on, as a young child. So, yeah. but there are a lot of really important questions I think you're right to sort out as a team in terms of what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it.
And perhaps even maybe we need to take a step back and look at our student base and say how many are in dual, how many are not in dual of our EL learners. I mean, do you guys have any idea the percentage of dual? So it might be interesting to see how many of our EL kids are.
I would guesstimate 30%.
Just 30%, you think?
I feel like a lot of the native Spanish speakers are not in dual.
I would wonder what that is at the K1 level when they've expanded dual. I would think that would be a lot higher. Mm-hmm. And I know from the Little Lab perspective, I mean, we have a lot of kids who get into dual.
Yeah, at least, I mean, 14 out of the 30 or 13, but a lot of it
like
look
50.
dual.
So maybe we'll look at that internally and kind of see what.
But at the same time, from that number, throughout the last 4 years of Lit Lab, only 21 have come back for tutoring so there's not that many that are here from 1 lab 2 weeks a week for your enrichment program. Does that make sense? So we can figure it out.
So I mean, that's an easy question to ask parents in the next round.
I hate to cut in here. I've got to rush to another meeting, and I think Dana's going to stay until you guys have a chance to kind of wrap up. So my apologies for not being able to get to that second question. But I look forward to talking to folks tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Do you want to repeat that second question, Jane?
So it also says that there needs to be explicit phonics instruction for English language learners, so really teaching them the code behind it. And so another kind of big picture question was right now we kind of put together different strategies for teaching phonics, and I'm wondering if that's the best approach, or if it would be better to have like a specific strategic phonics program. And then this follow up with that is in terms of vocabulary instruction, how to teach vocabulary beyond, just like the context of like what they're reading or what they're interested in, but how to fill in those gaps, kind of like everyday language that come up, I guess.
Okay, so the first question on phonics instruction, you say that there's a few different groups for strategy focused on phonics. Can you say more about those groups? Like what are those groups doing? Are they different approaches to phonics?
So like when we have our tutoring, for instance, we'll put in word study activities, but those activities are from different curricula. So it's not all so it could be Words Their Way, or it could be Orton Gillingham, or it could be, I don't know, Reading Reflex, or there's different ones.
Right.
And so, it's a uniform thing where we start with a strategy and move through for, if they're with us in tutoring for 2 years, that we do that for 2 years. I'm wondering if it's better to piecemeal together, or if it's better to kind of pick a strategy.
Really a program.
A program. Yeah.
So should you use a particular program versus another program to teach?
So should we use a mixture of different programs and curricula,
yeah.
Or is it more beneficial to kind of just pick one and stick with it?
You can really do it either way. There isn't anything that says this program is better than that program kind of thing. And different ways of looking at phonics. You might find, so you need to be responsive to the students. So let's say you're pulling from Words Their Way, you're pulling from Orton Gillingham, you're pulling from this program. Students are going to respond to those different instructional routines differently. So you should think about which routines do students seem to be responding to most. And it might be one thing for this group, but something different for another group. If you're pulling from multiple programs, that's okay. The only thing that I would make sure that you're doing is making sure that the sequence of skills that you're approaching is done systematically, so that you're not jumping around from skill to skill as you're moving from program to program. But you're watching your students to say, which one do they seem to be responding to? Is it these word sorting activities, or is it this mnemonic rule that's provided in Wharton Gillingham? Which one is resonating most with them, and then stick with that one. Because really it's supposed to be a short focused activity that gives them the skills, and then you're going to move into applying it within their reading and writing work.
Mm-hmm.
Is that making sense, answering that question?
Mm-hmm. And then the other one was just
around vocabulary. Yeah, how do you know which words students know and don't know? It's impossible to know, and this is one of the hardest things about education is there's no one right answer and there's no one right way to do it because every student's completely different. So especially with English language learners, you assume that they know words like table, but there might be a student in your group that doesn't know that this word in English is table. And we can't make those assumptions. So part of that is just being very responsive to how they are using words when they're talking, and gleaning from that, what am I learning about their word understanding? When you're approaching new tasks or new, you're talking about project-based learning, you might have things where you're pulling out words that you think should be vocabulary words, and you're giving them a pre-assessment where they can mark down for all of these words, I've never heard of this word before, I've never seen this word before, to I've heard of this word, but I don't know what it means, all the way up through, yes, I know what this word means, and I can use it in a sentence. And then you're kind of gleaning, well, it seems like most of the students in this group have never heard of any of these words. I really need to spend some time teaching it. Or it may be that one particular student doesn't know those words and the others do. So you can just teach it to that, the word to that particular student. Other things that you can do around, if it's some sort of project-based learning, you might have pictures that you're bringing in, and you're just asking them to label everything in the picture to see which things in this picture they know the English word for. And maybe they don't know the English word for, maybe they label it in Spanish, but that's okay because then you know that they have an understanding of the word in Spanish, but you need to teach them the English word for that Spanish word. And visuals like that, using pictures, if that's at all possible, can be a good way of, drawing on their prior knowledge because they can use the Spanish word to label a picture. And if you could find pictures that, are a picture of a scene or something like that, there's lots of things that would need to be labeled in there, whether it's, trees and leaves and branches and a dog and bench and all sorts of words could be part of that picture depending on what it is. So those are just some ways to figure out which words students don't know, but that's an endless task for teachers to find out what are all the words that my students don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think that's helpful. And I have one student in mind who I think would really respond well to the picture activity, who does have kind of a random word vocabulary knowledge bank. So I think that would be really helpful with her. Yeah. Thanks for going overtime.
Thanks. Yeah.
Is it technically overtime? I thought we went to 2:30, but I don't know what time we're in. Is it 2:30? Is it 2?
It was 2.
Okay. I was ready to go till 2:30, so if you want to keep talking.
Let's check in about that when we meet tomorrow. We could maybe push the next discussion till 2:15, but we have some staff who have to get to programs in the next.
Yeah, no problem.
But let's think about that for next time because I think we could always go longer.
Sounds good.
Thank you, and we'll debrief tomorrow.
Thanks,
Great.
Dana.
Thank you, Dana.
Bye. See you later, Sam.
So Sorry.